Hi everyone, Krista here. We're going to be talking a little bit about marketing budgets today. This is the time of year when everybody is really looking at setting a budget for the next year, so I thought it was a good time to just kind of run through that process, talk about, a good way to set a marketing budget internally, and even go back and look at overall ROI. So let's start off by just kicking around what is a marketing budget in general. Well, it's really a marketing plan in terms of cost. So a marketing budget is really an estimated amount of what we think is going to be required to promote a particular product or service. The budget is generally a part of the marketing plan overall, and it's really crucial that you have one in place so you really have a better idea of costs, and you can really circle that back from a reporting perspective. So this could include anything from promotional costs like advertising, PR, all the way to employing staff and office costs. Anything that's really included in overall marketing is going to kind of get included in this budget. One thing that I get asked a lot is what comes first, the budget or the plan? And this is really kind of a chicken or egg scenario here. And honestly, you can start either way. It's, do you figure out what you need to do and then put dollars to that? Or do you figure out what is my overall budget and then try to maximize within that budget to reach your goals? Honestly, I generally do some sort of combination of both of those things. So what do I know are my hard costs? And then what do I think I want to do? And how can we maximize it within what we feel is an appropriate budget from there? It's really, like I mentioned before, it's really important to make sure you have these budgets set up front so you can really go back each year and look at overall ROI. How did our marketing perform? How did we do as far as our investment, return on investment? Are we getting our money back in general? Some of these pieces are a little bit harder to report on than others. If we're doing more awareness campaigns, that's going to be a little bit harder to find your overall ROI. Just for simplicity's sake, we'll look at just overall investment dollars to sales dollars today, just because that's the simplest way to look at ROI. But there's lots of different ways you can do it as far as sales qualified lead, traffic, those types of things. Those all have ROI calculations as well. So today, again, we're going to be looking at growth and marketing budget. So that simple calculation can really just be taking your overall sales growth from a business or product line, subtracting your marketing costs, and then dividing that by your marketing costs. And that's going to give you your ROI. And here in a few, I'll kind of run through an example here where we can look at, your total marketing budget, what that growth is, and then what that return on investment would be if you actually hit your goals. So one thing to keep in mind here as we're kind of establishing this budget is it's going to be a little bit different for each company depending upon where your company's at. So one thing that we want to look at is kind of mode of the company. Are you in a growth mode? Are you kind of a younger company who's really looking to make big strides, making really big growth, impact over the year? Are you more of an established company who's been around for a while? You're not looking for really aggressive growth, but you're looking for steady growth over time. That's going to affect how much you really need to invest in your overall marketing to kind of hit those particular goals. So again, that's a really important thing to kind of consider. Another thing to consider when you're putting together your marketing budget is going to be your competition. So how does your company fit into your overall landscape? How aggressive is your competition being in their marketing and advertising? How much brand awareness do they have, and how much do you have, and how much are you trying to gain in that marketplace? So having just a really good idea of where do you fit and how aggressive are you really going to have to be? How many impressions, for lack of a better word, are you going to need to have out there in order to start making some of your goals? Speaking of goals, that's also another really important thing to have in place, just to make sure, again, you're really tracking back towards something. So as you're spending these dollars, you have a purpose. You're trying to hit a certain objective. So looking at, what's your business objective for the quarter, for the year, even 3 years out, you can kind of back that out and say, how aggressive do I need to be? Where, do I really need to be putting my dollars? And then how many contacts need to be delivered to your sales team, or how many leads need to go to your sales team based on their close rate, based on their impact, how kind of backing that all the way out. So from a traffic standpoint from your website, how many visitors do we need to get to generate X amount of leads to generate X amount of closed deals? So kind of backing it all the way out to that can give us a good idea of, again, how much we need to put, or how much effort we really need to put in from a marketing perspective. And then kind of leaning a little back again towards established company versus growth company. how big is your company and how long have you been around? How established are you? That's going to make a really big impact on how much you need to spend. So now that we kind of have an idea of some of the things we need to look at as far as what makes an appropriate budget, what kind of things do we actually need to include in that marketing budget? I talked a little bit about it earlier, but this is literally everything that you're going to need to have to do marketing. So it's trade shows, print pieces, promotional items, digital marketing, traditional marketing, software that you're going to need to execute on platforms, tools, websites, content marketing, reporting, social, advertising, branding, all of those different things need to go under this budget, not to mention any personnel or anything like that needs to be included as well. So it's really important that you have a good number here, something that really makes sense, and you're not kind of skimping on this, because there are a lot of items that need to go under this budget, or that should go under this budget, to really kind of help things be successful. And one other thing that I would consider under this budget that oftentimes gets overlooked is allocating some budget for experimentation. So there are new technologies that come out every year. There's new platforms that come out every year, and it makes sense to have a little bit of money to be able to play with those, see what's going to work for your company, and just giving you that flexibility to not quite be so rigid and be able to explore new things that are out there. So now we have all these different pieces. Well, how do we actually break those down into a budget? Well, I can kind of tell you how I look at it. I'm sure many others have different ways of kind of looking at how we want to do this. But generally speaking, how I approach this is I look at all my hard costs first. So I look at the things that I know are going to be there. I know that each year these things are going to come up and I have to make sure I have place for them in my budget. So I look at software, trade shows that I've already been established that I know I need to attend, media buys, any services that I have in place in order to execute on those, marketing materials or marketing services. Any of those established costs, I want to make sure I have a line item in my budget for those. And then I look at adding in items that I want to include. So these could be new items. It might be promotional items or new software or anything like that maybe I didn't do last year, but I know I want to try to include this year, or new technologies or something like that. So you don't have to get as granular as I want to send out 5 emails per quarter or something like that. You just need to know I need to have this amount of money in my budget to be able to utilize the software. And then you can back that out into your actual plan after you kind of have this in place, or vice versa. So from here, I also prioritize based on what I think the value is going to bring to the table. So, I'll kind of weigh out, is this particular item going to have more value than this other one, and prioritizing my budget based on that. So if something does need to get allocated or reallocated or cut, I kind of have an idea of what should kind of go first, because I really want to make sure that the pieces that have the highest value definitely make it into my budget versus the pieces that maybe just have some delight factor for customers. So this could be anything, again, from brand recognition, ROI, engagement. All of these pieces kind of have to be considered in here. Generally speaking, I start from an annual perspective, so I'll kind of get the annual budget done first, and then we can break it down into quarters or months, depending upon how you actually want to track spend. It's great if you have the time to track your actual spend versus your projected spend, so that as the year kind of goes along, you can make adjustments, you can reallocate, or why you are over or under budget as you go. Some companies have kind of a use it or lose it budget. So you kind of have to have a really good grasp on what you're doing, how it's performing, to know where you should really allocate your money at the end of the year if you have extra. So let's get into the nitty gritty here really quick and just kind of go over maybe an example and kind of get into some actual percentages of what we feel like is an appropriate marketing budget. Generally speaking, what we recommend is using a percentage of annual revenue or overall a growth initiative. So if you look this up online, you're going to get about 1,000 different answers. Everybody has kind of a different opinion about really what that percentage should be. What we have found is appropriate in this industry is really kind of an 8 to 10%, and the Gartner reports would kind of back that up. They feel like that's a relatively appropriate budget, especially for B2B. Now, B2C companies generally spend a little bit more. They might spend more like 15 to 20% on their overall marketing efforts, just because their efforts are a little bit different than B2B companies. But again, if you're a growth company, you may have to kick a little bit more in there just because you have some more aggressive goals. You may need to spend a little bit more. And then again, make sure you're allocating some of that budget to actually complete the services, whether that's with your in-house team or with an external team. You want to make sure you have kind of that budget in there for actual execution on your marketing efforts as well. Okay, so let me walk you through an example here, and I'm going to use nice round numbers to make my life a little bit easier. So let's say you're a $10 million company and you want a $3 million growth. So an appropriate marketing budget, if we're going to use that 8 to 10% range, might be somewhere between $800,000 and $1 million. So to go back at the end of the year and then calculate the ROI on that, let's say we did hit that $3 million growth we were going for, and we use the marketing budget of $800,000. So you take the $3 million in growth, subtract your marketing investment, which is the $800,000, and then divide it again by that $800,000, which is going to give you 2.75. Now, to make that a percent, multiply that by 100, which is going to give you your overall ROI, which is 275%. So you had a 275% return on investment if you had a $10 million company, achieved the $3 million growth, and had an $800,000 marketing budget. So hopefully you guys can kind of see how that comes together. If you plug some of your numbers in there, what your company size is, what your growth is, and then what your marketing budget is, and then kind of be able to come back and do that ROI. You can get a pretty good idea of how that money is returning for you. Is that a positive ROI? And something you can really kind of keep tabs on throughout the year if you're really tracking your budget appropriately. So just to kind of follow back up, summarize some of these points, it's important to establish an appropriate marketing budget for your company based on size, goals, how established your company is. You want to break that budget down into parts so you clearly know how much to allocate per marketing component and track your budget and results year round. Also, don't forget to experiment with some new technologies and find out what works for you guys. Thanks, everybody. Hope you found that insightful, and don't forget to rate and review.